Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be showing you the process of a very special doll. As some nerds will know, Magnus Protocol, a podcast by Rusty Quill, has recently started premiering. I have been a Magnus Archives fan for many years, and back in 2020, I decided to give a Jonathan Sims doll a go. That said, if you haven't listened to the Magnus Archives, there will be some spoilers discussed here in the design of the doll. Please go listen to it if you have any interest in it, and come back if you care about that. As you can see, I've chosen this doll as my base. He's very pale and blue. We will be changing that, don't worry. You'll see. I strip the doll, then soak the head in hot water to soften the vinyl. Then I pop the head off. I also remove the hands, as they'll be getting some attention as well. Once the head is off, I begin the process of removing the hair by cutting it as close to the scalp as possible. Once done, I take a screwdriver and loosen the plugs. Then I take a pair of pliers to remove them from the inside. Look at all that nasty glue. Yuck. Next, I pull out my 100% acetone to remove this face paint and blue hair paint from the doll head. I'm going to be using a very special process for this, so it needs to be very clean. Referencing this video, I bring together the supplies to shrink this doll. Well, more specifically the head. I want it to be more in proportion with the body. Pulling out a jar of acetone, I place the head in and make sure it's fully submerged. I let it soak for a few hours, and repeat the process multiple times to get the optimal results. After the head was squared away, I took the time to cut down this neck peg. It's going to need to be smaller to fit the shrunken head when it comes out of the bath. On to the next process we go. I start marking out the body. I plan to do this doll, inspired by a lot of the fan art I had seen of Monster John. I really liked the idea of adding eyes to each of his injuries where he'd been marked by the fears. To do this, I took a pencil and mapped out exactly where on the body I wanted them to go. I started with the Jude Perry hand burn, probably because it's my favorite. I took the time to sand the body before I marked it out. I didn't want to accidentally erase it by sanding it down later. The legs on this doll seem to be a different material. They didn't take well to sanding or painting, so I mostly left them alone after this. After marking out all the injuries, I took a woodworking tool and carved out divots into the plastic. Once that was done, I mixed up some epoxy sculpt and got to work. As I said, I did this doll back in 2020. I wasn't as concerned about safety and using gloves yet. That has changed. Don't be like me, kids. Protect yourself from potentially harmful chemicals as much as you can. I always wear gloves now. As you can see, the details are tiny. Normally, I would be worried about them falling off with the epoxy sculpt, but I think the carved divots along with the sanding give the material enough of a hold that it'll stay strong. I use both the flat end of a paintbrush, a mechanical pencil tip, and this tool I made out of a paper straw to really get the details in there and get it flush with the body. The first pass is usually just to lay down bulk, but because so many of these were so small, I was able to start working on the details very quickly. The detailing on such little pieces took a while. You'll really get to see them pop when we get to the face-up and recolor though. This process was long and arduous, but it turned out very cool, and I think the results are well worth it. Let's see. I've included a lot of detail here that is going to get covered by the clothes, eventually. You are all my witnesses. You are beholding, if you will. Let's tour the horrors as I've represented them real quick. Oh yeah, I need to put the head back on too. That's important. I had to cut down that net peg a little bit again. It was just still a little too big. The shoulder eyes that travel up to the face are from the Jane Prentice worm bites. Jane Prentice, my beloved. I also included larger eyes over the ribs for Jared in the flesh. Melanie and the Slaughter are responsible for the other shoulder. I want to say I included the neck scars for Daisy in the Hunt, but I actually can't quite remember. And also, oh my god, Daisy, my true beloved. What can I say? I support women's wrongs. I love an objectively bad person trying to get better and ultimately failing because to save their friends, they have to be the monster they never wanted to be. I love her so much. This also applies to John. I gotta swing back around from the Daisy love tangent back there. I think that covers all the physical scars I included here. The mental ones will have to be left to the imagination and the fanfiction writers. And here's the final details. All that work just to be covered up by clothes. Witness me, because it's about to get worse. We have arrived at the face-up, or should I say body-up. This was basically the only male doll I had at the time when I decided to make this video. Ideally, I would have had a clawed wolf for this, but I didn't. I knew that he was the wrong color, but I also knew that wasn't going to stop me. Nothing ever does. I decided to use the chalk method, which I had never done before this point, to recolor the doll to the right shade of brown. I started with a light brown base. As I went, I added more and more layers with more and more Mr. Super Clear to essentially save the progress. Pretty soon, it started to build up into the right color. I also did the arms and hands separately. This method is known for being better on the joints. It flakes less easily than acrylic paints, and since I'd done all this work on the sculpting, it felt important to do the best I could with everything else. I'm going to allow the process to play out a bit here. While I could fast forward through this, I think watching the doll's tone come together is very cool. It was also a painstaking task, and I want to show you guys the work it took to get it to where it is now. To make sure I covered as much of this doll as I could, I pulled the arms and hands off the doll. That allowed me access to the hard-to-reach inner joints. As you can see, it starts out patchy and thin, but it builds. This process took almost an entire can of MSC. It's an expensive process, but worth it in the end. A little bit of a funny story for you while you wait. As you can see, the color is finally getting solid. It was also about this time that my neighbor, who my mom had been regaling with my doll projects, brought over her teenage daughter's collection that she no longer wanted. Would you like to know what doll was in there? Want to guess? Right as I finished this recolor, a clawed wolf fell into my lap, and the world laughed at me. It was fine though. It's all fine. Ultimately, I wasn't that upset, because the color matching on the doll skin to the carved eyes would have been difficult anyways. This gave me a really consistent base to work on. It was a pretty crazy coincidence though. Anyways, as I started to work on the details, I also started having small issues. I really wanted to do some chalk highlighting. However, Mr. Super Clear darkens colors when you spray them down, and I often found the highlights were falling flat back into the skin color. All that work and only the tiniest bit of highlighting to show. Still, it wasn't so bad. The eyes came along nicely as well. You can start to really see the details of the sculpting I did here. Even the tiniest of them have eyelids. I was very dedicated to the cool factor. However, the more I built up on the joints and the body, the more I realized I might have some issues going forward. Once I started putting the body back together, the joints did get a little more banged up than I would have liked. I had this idea to use a Sharpie to kind of fill in these areas that were getting scraped back to blue. That seemed to work alright, even though it didn't match perfect with the rest of the doll body. Pick your battles, I guess. I'd rather have it dark than blue. I also used the Sharpie for the burn mark on John's hand. I wanted to have the actual red burn scar in there as well as his eyes. This is easily my favorite part of this doll. It's subtle, but striking when you actually take the time to notice it. I love the way it came out, and I'm very happy with it. I used my watercolor pencils to get more details into the eyelids and on the face. I gave John his signature eye bags because he is so tired, someone please let him have a nap, and his scruffy facial hair that I know he has because this dude does not have the time or energy to shave. These seem to stay well, even with the MSC coats, so I was pleased with it. You can really start to see me getting into the gritty details here. Each eye was colored in with white acrylic and then toned down and shaded with watercolor pencils. Once that was done, I sketched out where each iris would go. I decided to go with simple brown and black irises for John's eyes. I wanted them to match his natural ones. I also wanted to keep them fairly flat because there were so many of them, and a fair number of them were too small to add detail to. Probably. I wasn't quite at the same skill level as I am today, but I think I'd still have made that decision if this was a doll I'd made this year. I then come back to the eyelids and work on shading and blending them into the skin. I wanted them to feel as cohesive as possible. It really started to come together at this point. As the final step of the body and face-up, I painted John's hairline. And with that, the recolor and face-up are finished. Now it's time to cover up all that hard work with clothes. I chose a pretty neutral academic palette. I love green and purple. Great color scheme. I used the brown to make the slacks for John. They have room for a button so that I can close them up and are strategically too long so that I can 1. Roll them up, and 2. Make sure I cover up those blue legs. Yeah, I don't know if any of you noticed, but they did not get recolored. Nothing I did worked on them, so I left them alone. I used this white cotton to make his dress shirt. Has a little collar and everything so he can be all proper. I used the green and purple to start making the vest. The vest is green, and initially I thought I was going to use some embroidery thread to seal the edges, but I actually hated how that looked. Instead, I used a strip of the purple material that I sealed with heat and hand-stitched it to the edges. I think the end result looks very nice. Lastly, I used this fleece to make John up a trench coat. He needs something to go running through the tunnels with, am I right? Side note, my friend said that he thought that phrase was cheese in the last video, so I promised to put it in every video going forward just to annoy him. Let's see how many scripts I can slip it into. With that, the outfit is done, but we have more work to do before we can put it on the doll. We are reaching the finale of this doll, the hair. I use yarn to make the wefts. I cut it twice as long as I want the wefts to be, tie it around a paintbrush, and cut the edges. I then brush it out with a slicker brush. Once they are brushed out, I hit them with that trusty straight iron and get them laying flat and beautiful. After that, I lay them out on a plastic surface and use Mod Podge to make the wefts. Once dried, I clean them up and start to glue them down to the head. I start at the bottom and make my way up. I actually decided to give the hair some dimension by adding some of those premature stress grays that I just know John has. I added a few strands of them in the hair and really loved how they looked. Once all that was glued down, it was time to move on to the finishing touches. For said finishing touches, I get the buttons and Velcro down on John's dress shirt. I wanted to get it fitted to him before I put everything into place. Next, I slip on the pants and roll up the cuffs so that it covers that nasty blue. Then I put on his black loafers. After that, it's quick and easy to slip on his vest, his tie that I also made for him, and his jacket. Everything fits perfectly, which means it's time for perhaps the most controversial part of this doll. Oh man, the hair. I think this is perhaps my only regret. I kept messing with it, and despite my mom pleading with me not to cut it short, I did cut it to about shoulder length. I also put it in this half up, half down style. I think I regret this. I think the longer hair might have been the move. I don't hate it, but I constantly go back and forth on it. I'm very tortured. Still, I don't think it looks bad, and I enjoy it either way. The very last part of this doll was making a small pair of square wireframe glasses. These are a little rougher than what I might make today, in my opinion. Still, they don't look bad, and they work with the aesthetics of the tired academia that I was going for. And with that, the doll is finished. May I present to you my latest guest, Jonathan Sims, head archivist of the Magnus Institute. We're having tea, and I'm making him take a nap because God knows he needs one. Even if this doll is an older project, I'm still very proud of him. I'm also very excited I've gotten to share the secrets of this doll with you all, because nobody who's seen him in real life has felt the need to undress him to see all those eyes. What can I say? I love doing the most. Also, if it wasn't obvious by the fit, Vast aligned. Vast avatars sound off in the comments. The rest of you can too. Gotta love a good old personality sorting. I hope you enjoyed this video and will join me again. Until the next video, stay safe, stay happy, stay cool. Catch you on the flip side.